Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Safeguarding Your Legal Practice, and it's a guide to endpoint protection for law. So going to give a bit of introduction to the two people that are talking today. I'll hand over and let Guy, who is our product manager, introduce himself.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name's Guy Martin. A senior product manager at CTS. I'm responsible for a number of services in the portfolio. So our CTS Cloud platform, Azure, and modern workplace solutions. So looking forward to talking a bit about endpoint management today.
Thanks, Guy. And my name's Stephen Howe. I head up pre-sales and solution architecture here at CTS. So we'll crack on with the webinar. So a couple of housekeeping items. There are going to be technical people on this webinar, and there are probably going to be some non-technical people. So I've been asked this before, and actually I was asked this in a meeting last week when I was waffling on about how great endpoint management is and how risky not doing it is. And someone said, well, actually, what's an endpoint? So I'm in IT, so I apologise. Endpoint is it's quite an enterprisey term. Endpoint refers to the devices that are used by your employees and users. So that can be tablets, laptops, workstations. Endpoint being the end device at the end of your network that people use and interact with. So hopefully that clears up the jargon for the day. Bit of a point around Q&A. If you could raise any questions you've got using the questions box and not the chat box. We've got someone that's moderating the questions and we'll look to get to all of those at the end. We've got a Q&A section. If we run out of time or if you've got additional questions, we will answer the questions and circulate them after the webinar if they're not covered. The webinar is being recorded, so there will be a replay put up on our website and possibly across social media. And if you do have any other questions that you don't get a chance to ask or you forget, look at the replay, and we'll also drop links to Guy and myself so you can contact us and ask any questions that you might have. So today's agenda, we're here for about 45 minutes with a Q&A tacked on at the end. And we're trying to keep this quite informational. We've done the introduction. Guy's going to talk to you about cyber threats. We're going to talk about the challenge of managing endpoints and then actually managing endpoint for law. What's the solution? What's the process? And we'll give you some use cases and then leading into a Q&A. So before we kick off, I'd like to ask a question. There's a poll that's popped up and I'd really appreciate if you could answer it because I've asked to put these in. Do you understand the risk of unmanaged endpoints to your business or organization? I'll leave that up there for a little while and we'll end it a little bit later, but we'll carry on with the webinar. If you could answer that, that would be much appreciated. So I'm going to hand over to Guy and he's going to kick off the webinar with the cyber threat report.
Cool. Cheers, Steve. So to begin with, I just wanted to highlight the recent cyber threat report that was carried out by the National Centre for Cybersecurity, the NCSC. The purpose of this report has been to help law firms and legal practices really understand a bit more about the current cyber threats and to what extent the sector is being targeted. The report does offer some practical guidance as well on how organisations can be resilient against these threats. So I would say if you haven't seen it already, go and take a look at it. But I'm just going to pull out a few of the highlights from that report. So, to start with, the legal sector is and remains a prime target for cybercrime. Obviously, the high-profile cases, the sensitive data, whether that's mergers and acquisitions, the high-profile clients that you're dealing with, all information like this is going to be highly valuable to any criminal organisation. The funds that are handled through, whether it's M&A conveyancing, and often with funds, there's transactional time pressures, which are going to make it really attractive for certain types of cybercrime. And also, knowing that any disruption in the sector is going to be costly, leaving your firm unable to access systems. That's going to have a direct impact on your ability to bill moving forward. So if you just click on, please, Steve. So although the shift to hybrid working has, increased productivity across the industry, it's also created challenges for maintaining secure work practices. And employees are now connecting through to corporate networks from home, which has increased the risk exposure for organizations across the network. The sector has seen significant increases in spending on security within the top 100 firms, with an average of 0.5% of fee earner income now being spent on cybersecurity. Excuse me. Now, this is great if you're a larger firm. Small to mid-sized firms will find this more challenging. So it's essential you're having the right technology partners. Cybersecurity expertise is in demand across all sectors, and it is a very competitive market at the moment. So to recruit and maintain in-house security teams is going to be expensive and could potentially introduce more risk due to the pace of those evolving threats. The report highlights seeing an increased activity around certain threat actors. So hackers for hire, so they earn money through commission to carry out those malicious attacks for third parties. The report also notes some growth in the hacktivist community, and the risk is greatest here if your firm is acting for an organisation that's at odds with hacktivist political, economical agendas, such as those working in maybe life sciences and energy sectors. Nation state threats, so where law firms particularly exposed if they're part of wider supply chains used by nation states, and maybe also be a greater risk for firms that advise on particularly sensitive clients or work in locations that are hostile to the UK. And finally, not forgetting insider threats, so not always malicious, but employee breaches of security can stem from that lack of training, or if there's onerous processes in place, which encourage staff to cut corners in order to get their job done. So just being, maybe just be honest mistakes that happen there by clicking on a suspicious email incorrectly. And lots of firms don't believe they're going to be a target. However, 75% of surveyed law firms reported having been a target of a cybercrime in the last 12 months. That's according to the SRA. The Cyber Breaches Survey 2023 reported that 48% of UK business that identified an attack, the most common threat vector there was a phishing attempt at 79%. Business email compromise, so that's a more advanced phishing email crafted specifically to target individuals in your organisation. The aim being to trick an employee into transferring funds or revealing sensitive information. And these types of attack have increased by 30% in 2022. The SRA does publish scam emails in their on their website. There's got a scam alerts page, so it's worth having a look on that, the SRA website, and have a look at that page. You will notice when you're looking through that the majority of these are phishing attacks. Ransomware, so where criminals gain access to your system, encrypt your data, demanding you to pay for this data to be unencrypted, decrypted. And these ransomware type incidents continue to increase. The SRA reported that 18 firms were victims of ransomware attacks in 2021. UK GDPR requires you to implement appropriate measures to restore personal data. That means you need to put in place threat assessments, risk assessments, and controls, have offline or segregated backups. The report also advises business to be transparent about any ransomware attack, so seek assistance and openly communicate back to the NCSC and the Information Commissioner's Office. So that having that collaborative approach around that is going to will benefit your firm, but also contributes to enhancing the overall threat landscape for everyone. And simply paying the ransom isn't deemed an appropriate measure. 80% of organisations that paid ransoms were actually targeted again by the same criminals. depending on what research you use, the average number of passwords that we have now per person can be anything between 80 and 100. So meaning password attacks are more commonplace due to weak passwords, reuse of credentials, and also where you're giving employees excessive permissions. So you really should be focused on giving permissions to the systems and data documents that the employee needs to do their job. And also you should really be looking at multi-factor authentication where you can. 2023 is set to be a record-breaking year with software supply chain attacks already increasing by 742% between 2019 and 2022. And Gartner's predicting that by 2025, 45% of organizations will have experienced attacks on their software supply chains. So if we look a bit deeper into endpoint threats, 68% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack. The percentage is continuing to grow rapidly year on year. And there's more pressure from regulatory bodies such as the SRA to ensure firms have systems and policies in place to ensure that your client data is protected. And then this is coupled with changing working habits. So more employees are hybrid, working across multiple devices. We know the pandemic intensified this, but it's now the norm, not fixed working hours, not working out of an office. And what this has really led to is that greater security risk. And alongside this, we've got increased complexity of IT management now. So organizations tell us that over the past couple of years, the number of tools and products they're looking after and supporting is increasing in complexity. So if you couple that with the backdrop of the current economic uncertainty, where organizations previously looked at multi-vendor solutions, now they're thinking about how they can consolidate those vendors to really reduce the cost of operation, but without compromising on security. So looking at addressing the security risks and also reducing that complexity. So I'll pass back over to Steve now. Who's going to dig more into the endpoint device challenges you may be experiencing.
Yes, thanks, Guy. Quite some scary statistics there. Okay, so there's lots of challenges around endpoint devices like the laptops, desktops, as we kind of covered at the top of this webinar. Could sit here all day and cover them all, but here's a couple of some of the challenges that we see that are commonplace across clients and people within this industry. So maintaining robust data security and privacy, right? Legal professionals handle sensitive data and client information and client privileged information, which means that endpoints have become prime targets for cyber attacks. The days of people trying to hack into your firewall, they still exist, but they're not as prevalent as there are 2 points of weakness at the edge of your network. There is the person and the device that the person is using. So there is a massive uptick in actually seeing cyber attacks happen on the end device. Also, the end device has access to a lot more information based upon the person that's being compromised. We've then got increasing demand around regulatory compliance. There is an increasing complexity around data retention, protection, and transmission. So we've got things like GDPR, we've got Cyber Essentials. If you're ISO, got the SRA, if you're international, there's all sorts of regulatory compliance. And endpoints need to be configured to support these requirements, to the extent that some of these regulations actually mandate that endpoint devices need to be managed and need to be centrally controlled. We then see lengthy and complex deployments, and that's not just the deployment of managed endpoint, it's more about the deployment of devices and getting them into the hands of your users. Non-standard builds, non-standard configurations. If we standardize the build, the configuration out of the box, and we streamline that, the laptop can be shipped directly to the end user if they're remote working, and they can just get it open and they can start using it. That has a big uptick in the end user experience. It leads to higher productivity, and it does play quite a lot, we find, towards retention as well. And then finally, enabling flexible and secure working practices. Lawyers and legal professionals, as we know, frequently work outside the confines of your offices and your building. And so, as I said before, firewalls, secure networks, they're not going away, but it does mean there's an increasing need to balance this flexibility with security. And what we find is that organizations will quite often lean into one favoring over the other. So the balance of increasing flexibility and end user experience sometimes comes at a detriment of cybersecurity and risk management, and vice versa. Sometimes leaning too far into cybersecurity and risk management, i.e. locking everything down, that can really sort of harm the end user experience. So it's finding a balance. There isn't a golden rule for every organization. It's not one fits all. This is actually something that is very much tailored to you, your appetite to risk, and the desire to increase kind of productivity. So then we've got the risk of unmanaged endpoints. So the first one being device hardening and patch management. So device hardening, we want specific security configurations deployed to the device. Unmanaged endpoints are going to leave you vulnerable in this scenario. And patch management, you want up-to-date software, up-to-date security patches on your devices. And again, unmanaged devices are going to be running outdated software with known vulnerabilities. So those two kind of sit in if you're in the cyber essentials camp, but do play across the organization, even if you're not. And then we've got detection delay. Unmanaged endpoints are going to have much less visibility within your organization and your network. That gives you a lack of visibility into your current protection, your current security posture. And then you've got containment and remediation. Responding to and remediating an incident is very complicated without managed endpoints. And if an incident does recur, there's going to be delays in collecting any sort of forensic evidence. This one's quite important because the legal sector is ahead of a lot of other industries in that they have incident response plans in place. What we do find, however, is a lot of organizations will have an incident response plan that either hasn't had a run book or a playbook against it, and it falls apart because you run the incident response, and actually once you get to the tech stack, you can't actually respond because you don't have managed endpoints. So just something to consider if you've got an incident response plan. When's the last time you checked it? When's the last time you ran a playbook or a run book against it? And then we've got inconsistent policies, lack of a holistic view into your security posture, any sort of compliance status that you've got. So, for example, if you are in that cyber essentials, are you staying compliant? It's not a point in time exercise. It's no good becoming compliant at the beginning of the year, for example, and then halfway through having some sort of breach and sort of thinking, well, we were cyber essentials certified. It's not a point in time. It is an ongoing compliance that you need to manage. So unmanaged devices are going to, make devices more, vulnerable if you don't have consistent policies. Inconsistent policies across devices leads to complexity around which devices, are locked down and which ones are not. And then unauthorized devices. It's almost impossible to detect unauthorized devices if you don't manage and have visibility of your authorized devices. That sounds very obvious, but the amount of times that I speak to people and they aren't really blocking and don't have the ability to block unauthorized devices, that's not just unauthorized devices on your network, it's unauthorized devices accessing your resources, such as Microsoft 365 and other cloud instances that you've got. So it leads to increased risk. It definitely leads to increase in security breaches and data loss. So I thought I'd have some statistics as well because I need to compete with Guy and I haven't had any yet. So the risk of unsecured endpoints, 70% of successful breaches start on endpoint devices such as laptops, mobile phones and desktops. Once it's compromised, it's a lot easier to get into the network, and it just makes it a lot easier to deploy and kind of accelerate that breach throughout your organization. Extensive remote device usage goes beyond securing networks. This is, as we said before, you need to be securing the remote working environment, and that is the whole, we'll go into that a little bit more detail with some use cases, but that is the whole experience, not just the network that you are sitting on. And then vulnerable endpoint breaches, as we said, they spread fast, compromising systems and enabling unauthorized access. And that does cause data leaks. A breach can happen in seconds now, not just minutes, hours and days. And the time to actually exploit that is a lot quicker than it used to be. So I'm going to pass back over to Guy, who's just going to cover, what is managed endpoint for law.
Cool, thanks, Steve. You can click on once. Cool. So before we jump into specifics of the CTS service offering, I just wanted to focus on some of the outcomes that you might want to be looking for in a solution. So you need a solution that's going to empower your workforce. So we know hybrid working is the norm, but you need to ensure you've got the controls in place when data can be accessed, things like restricting access based on the connection type or specific location. Self-service is important for employees as well. Also, today more firms give employees the choice of device, whether that's a Windows, Mac, iOS or Android device. So look for device agnostic centralized policies that can be applied across all of those devices. No doubt already managing a really diverse set of applications and devices, and that's challenging and complex to keep on top of. So you need to look at simplified controls, that central management, app and device policies, solutions that simplify the life cycle of these apps through the build, deployment, configuration, protection of those applications. Securing corporate resources is essential, with controls in place to lock down and restrict access to the systems and data. Some of this does come down to you thinking about and having strong data management, data classification policies in place. Also ensuring software applications remain updated and no outstanding vulnerabilities. Improving end user outcomes is really important. So that end user experience needs to be monitored. You need to get continuous feedback from your employees, whether that's from initial onboarding, how they access applications, the device performance. Being on top of this is going to really reduce the IT effort. So think about things like how you manage builds. Can you use standard repeatable builds, implement central policies? Getting that optimal performance around devices and apps is essential for that good user experience, and it's going to improve your staff satisfaction and staff retention. We've mentioned increased requirements for alignment with SRA, ISO, GDPR, and they're demanding that technology standards and policies and procedures are in place that align with their best practice. So having visibility and management of policies, visibility of the health of devices and apps is going to be essential as well, to ensure you can address any issues and remain compliant. You need to move the onus away from the employee. So the right solution, so just go back one, Steve. The right solution ensures that each device connected to the network is secure and approved to access the resource the employee needs. So that's protecting your network, systems and data. And this is coupled with regular cyber training for your employees to make sure they're secure and vigilant. Okay, thanks, Steve. So if we look at the features and benefits of the solution, so technology underpinning our services, Microsoft, and we do use Intune, Defender. Internally, we're using Lighthouse, which gives us that central control and management across all our clients. Microsoft Intune remains the leading unified endpoint management solution, according to Gartner. Millions and millions of devices are managed and protected by Intune, and it gives that end-to-end protection and the largest pool of threat intelligence data out there, which is feeding and integrated into their AI tooling. So our service really starts with an assessment of your current environment. So we'll come in, Steve and his team will come in, work with you to understand the current device and application landscape. We want to understand the challenges that you're facing and make sure these challenges get addressed. Make recommendations and identify areas of focus. We start that process with looking at how we can potentially implement our predefined standard policies that we use across all our clients and map that through to your security requirements, looking at standard builds and the app security that you need. You can click on, Steve. So we're continually working with our legal sector clients to develop and enhance our security policies that are applied across users, devices, and apps. This level of endpoint security is going to improve your security score, reduce risk, improve compliance, and it's important to ensure you continue your security accreditation with things like Cyber Essentials. Onboarding new users is simplified with secure pre-configured Windows builds that enable fast, consistent onboarding. This is going to free up your IT teams and streamline the processes. So with things like group policies and apps being seamlessly applied. And we can work with you as required to create, harden, build, work out test plans and roll these out across the workforce for you. Application lifecycle management includes the packaging of the app for Intune. So it's the deployment of the app, any specific app configurations that need to be applied, and finally the protection of that app through things like conditional access or device compliance policies. These are going to protect your systems and data, and we're also providing that patch management for the OS and the apps that you use. When we talk about apps, we talk about standard 365 Office apps, Word, Excel, productivity apps that you may be using, whether that's Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, App Store apps, that's Windows, Apple App Store apps, and then line of business apps, which we can package for you, ready for Intune deployment. We can simplify and secure device management, and we have a few options available. So corporate device management. So this is where we create a CTS standardized autopilot build for self-service auto provisioning. So that would be a Windows 10 or Windows 11 build. Additionally, you can support corporate devices where it's a non-CTS build. So you may already be using Intune and have got some builds out there. But it's not feasible maybe to go through that new build process immediately. So we can manage that for you. And then we have mobile application management. So if you're using personal devices, if you operate a BYOD policy, this is where CTS configure and manage the app protection policies for across Windows devices, Mac and iOS, and Android. And we're able to ensure security and device control with the features implemented, such as remote lock, selective wipe and device trackings to give you that extra peace of mind. So you may have security skills challenges in your business. So we operate the managed service, which can operate and support your endpoint management and act as an extension to your IT team. The service includes regular service reviews, health checks, providing ongoing monitoring and reporting, Microsoft Secure Score, and working with you to plan and address any needs that you've got on remediations. So we're obviously legal sector aligned, legal sector specialists, and we only focus on the legal sector. So we understand the demands of the sector, and we've developed all of our services with our 200 plus client base. Where that large customer base uses a similar set of applications across document management, case management, practice management. And what we've done is build a CTS application catalog for these legal apps. So things like iManage, NetDocs, BigHand. There's a list of applications that we will support. And what we've done with the solution is we've pre-packaged these applications. So you get these applications at no additional charge. We'll maintain them, patch them for you. And if you've got applications that aren't currently in the legal, in what we've defined as the catalog, and they're legal applications, we can bring them into the catalog. So you can, that catalog's just going to get bigger and be focused around those legal apps. We've also developed a standard set of security policies, I think I mentioned it before, to support that ongoing compliance, best practice, cyber essentials aligned. So these standard policies are in use across our customer base and offer that best practice and continued improvement. Things like conditional access control, disk encryption, identity, restriction about access to certain types of media. And finally, you got the 365 adoption. So depending on what subscriptions you're on now, you may already be licensed to use services, some of these Intune Defender services, if you're not already using them. So we can have a look at that and work with you. Final point there. Just, this solution integrates with the wider cybersecurity services that we offer. So we've got things like secure email services that are going to protect you against spam, phishing, and targeted email attacks, DMARC, domain protection, identity access, password management, and then some of the other areas that I mentioned around cyber awareness training. We can provide that for your employees. Meaning employees are generally going to be the weakest link in all of this. So making sure that they're aware, they've got that training is going to be really essential. So yeah, hopefully that provided a flavour of what our solution is and how we can support your IT teams and help manage that service for you.
Thanks, Guy.
Cheers.
Just a quick note, there are questions coming in. I haven't ignored them. We've got a Q&A section at the end. So what I'm going to do is correlate the questions, and I'll answer those during the Q&A session along with any others that come in. So for those of you that have raised questions, we're not ignoring you. We can see them coming in. And if we don't get across all of them, we'll circle back round with them. So just going to cover off how does it actually work and give you some use case scenarios and some insight into some of the things you can do in addition once you have got your devices and you've got an endpoint management solution. So we look at the managed endpoint, from cradle to grave. So there's 4 areas here. We've got the device deployment, so out of the box, actual setup of the deployment, getting it into the hands of your users, Windows, Mac, Android, iOS. And then we've got managing those endpoints. So that can be managing the configurations on the endpoint, the life cycle of the endpoint, updating it, keeping it secure, applying those policies, patches, and everything else. And then we've got application management. That's very key. It's quite critical around managing applications, not just from the app catalog perspective, but how data interacts with applications across devices. And then we've got policy management, and there's two sides and twofold in this policy management. There's the policies that go across the devices, and that can be compliance with your own cybersecurity policies internally, but also policy management that aligns to things such as Cyber Essentials, ISO, the SRA, GDPR. So it's not a solution that gets you compliant or achieving compliance and certification in any of those areas. It's a key stepping stone in that piece of becoming compliant and ensuring that you've got policies that keep you remaining compliant. And then we kind of wrap that up in a managed service. So that kind of takes it from, that cradle to grave. So a couple of examples coming up. So deployment and enrollment. So I'm just going to call her Sally. Her devices are automatically enrolled and configured once they're given to her. Or they can be enrolled and configured on existing devices. So there's the new devices for maybe Sally, who's the new employee, and then there's these enrolling and putting policies on your existing devices, so you've got complete coverage. So it's going to ensure that those devices comply with your company policies before anyone can access corporate resources. Does a few things here. It mitigates risk by giving you a standardized build out of the box. A standardized build inherently and naturally reduces the exposure to risk for your organization, and it's going to ensure that deployed policies ensure consistency in that risk mitigation. We've then got something called conditional access. You may have heard of MFA, multi-factor authentication, or two-factor authentication. Conditional access, because MFA is not, it's not 100% bulletproof. It's not a silver bullet solution. Conditional access does a couple of things across your environment. So managed endpoint checks for the configured policies and includes verifying that Sally's device health, location, before and that she's using a secure network. So we do 4 things here. We look at the physical location that someone and their device is coming into your network or your environment from. So physical location being, are they at home? Are they in the office? Or are they in an area of political unrest or an area that is known as high vulnerability for theft, either physical theft or digital theft of data? We look at the network that they're connecting from. Is it a known network, i.e. the corporate network? Is it a VPN? Is it an MPLS? Is it an SD, a software-defined network? Or is it an unknown network? And we can do certain things based upon the conditions. And then the device, is it a known device? Is the device compliant? Does it have the right things, policies installed? And then lastly, the actual user. So this ensures that even if a device is compliant, the access is granted based upon other conditions. So like that geographic restricted area or using an unsecured public network. So that further mitigates risk through kind of unknown or device or unknown network or vulnerable access. We've then got app protection policies. So once authenticated, Sally's going to be using company approved applications like Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Teams to access documents and work on them. She's going to notice that she might not be able to copy data from those applications or save those documents to unauthorized locations like personal cloud storage if it's a BYOD device. So we can control the actual data and the application. So what that does is that ensures your corporate data stays within approved locations and can't be moved to unsecure ones. So again, further mitigating risks. And that's something that you can do once you've got the endpoint management in place. And then kind of tying that together with endpoint security, Sally's going to receive automatic updates that are pushed to her device through remotely configured security patches and policies. You can change policies as well. Maybe there is an increase in policy that needs to happen, or you might need to pull back on a policy because it's too restrictive. And then also the documents that Sally accesses are encrypted, right? Even if she saved it within the confines of allowed apps, anyone with the right credentials can't read it because we're managing the encryption on that device. So that's going to protect against potential data leaks if the device is lost or stolen. And it's going to ensure that devices are always up to date with latest security patches and reducing vulnerabilities. There's a lot more, but those are the sort of the key areas to give you some food for thought around some of the things that you can do in addition to managing the endpoint. So we're going to wrap up and move into a Q&A. I just want to pop a poll up. We've got a complimentary workshop that we're offering to anybody that's on this webinar or is watching the replay. We're going to offer you a complimentary endpoint readiness workshop. This is open to everyone. It's going to do a few things. We're going to have one of the consultants sit with you, review critical Microsoft 365 configurations that are specific to maybe deploying your, an endpoint management solution. We'll then assess organizational readiness, cultural readiness, and tech readiness along with capacity, and kind of just play back, because you can put it in, you may already be in a good situation to do this, but you might not. So it'd be useful just to know if that's actually useful to anybody that's on here. If you could answer that, that would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to move, I'll leave the poll open and move into questions, and I'm going to pull up, so you have to bear with me. I'm just going to move the questions onto the screen so it looks like I'm looking at you all. So there's quite a few questions to get through, so let's have a quick look. One of the big selling points of Citrix, okay, so the question here is, Citrix, for people that may not know, Citrix is a virtual desktop solution. We provide a Citrix virtual desktop service. There are others as well. So you might heard of VMware Horizon, Microsoft Terminal Services, Remote Desktop Services, Azure Desktop, AVD. There's quite a lot of them around. The question is more around, do you think using one of those remediates some of the risks that come with having unmanaged endpoints? The answer is yes. So I can't answer this for everyone. In my experience, if you have just what is known as thin clients, so you had no fat clients with an Apple operating system or Windows desktop on them, thin clients in a VDI solution does, to an extent, mitigate some of those risks. If you are in a situation where you have either a hybrid endpoint, so that's an endpoint that runs Microsoft Windows or an Apple operating system with a remote desktop client, such as XenApp or XenDesktop if you're in Citrix, or RDP, or an app launcher, then you still really should be managing the endpoint. The endpoint also, just from a life cycle perspective of who is it, where is it, and performance related situations. So there isn't a yes or no answer to that. Also, it depends on, there are other variables to that, on how locked down is your environment. So some organizations will have a VDI environment where they don't necessarily lock down the flow of data in and out of that VDI environment. An example of that can be where an organization is using Citrix or another solution to access a legacy application, but they allow the end user to continue to use Outlook and Word or Teams on the local desktop and move data between. So I'm not really answering the question with a yes or no. There's a yes, it can, but, if that makes sense. So hopefully that's answered that question to a degree.
I can pick up the next one, Steve. So is this a new service your company offers, or have you already been providing this for some of your clients? So this is a version 2 service. So we've done a lot of work to look at the existing service and make improvements. So things like having the app catalog for legal sector apps, some work around the policies, and again on the back end of the service of how we manage things across all our clients. So it is a new version of this service, and if existing clients are on it, they will move on to this over time.
Thanks, Guy. Would you support shared PC setups, for example, kiosk? The short answer is, and it seems to be like I'm the one that's saying yes, but yes, but. So it depends on what the PC is, i.e. what is the kiosk. I'm assuming this is kiosk mode because it's the same person asking the question, in relation to having a kiosk PC specifically for a thin client. So for context for people on this webinar, and this might be wrong in the person asking this question situation, some people will put Windows or Mac into kiosk mode, which is a locked down way of just allowing access to a particular application, which is normally just launching the VDI onto the actual device. Yes, we can. There are caveats to it, in that if you are locally locking down, certainly on the Mac side, if you are locally locking down with localized policies, it's very difficult to then manage it from a centralized cloud environment. So potentially it might be that you would kiosk Macs and PCs in the Intune, in the managed endpoint device. So what that might mean is backing out of the current local, for example, if it's PC and you've got local group policies managing it, it might be that we need to back out of that and then create the kiosk environment for a set of PCs once they're re-enrolled, if that answers that question.
I'll pick up the next one, Steve.
Yeah.
So sounds like a fully managed service. What level of control would you be comfortable with giving to an in-house IT team? they like to be very hands-on. I think it's something we need to dig in a little bit deeper with you. The challenge, so it is a managed service. There is some things that we could definitely look at offloading to your in-house IT. Depends what it is though, because it does open up some areas around support, demarcation, I suppose, who's responsible for what areas, specifically things like, if you're doing the build as part of the service, who's remediation of builds, if there's issues with builds, where does that responsibility lie? So I suppose generally we're open to it, but there's probably further discussions that need to be had to kind of lock down on what areas you're needing to be hands-on with, I suppose. But happy to have a further discussion on that.
Cheers, Guy. I'll answer the next couple. So Apple phone's functionality is severely limited when enrolled into an MDM. For example, you can't install apps from the store. How would you help sell this idea into senior execs who have been using those kind of phones as their own personal devices? So, okay, so there's a multi-triangle approach to this. I'm going to start with the enterprise approach of, if you're an organization that has not tens, but probably the multitude of tens, i.e., I'd say 50 to 100 iPhones upwards, you will probably need a combination of the endpoint management for law, in addition to there's a product in the Apple environment that bolts into Intune. Now, this doesn't come part of our service, but there is a specific MDM solution that would manage the problem that you currently have with the App Store. And then
you use Apple Business Manager in the.
You can use Apple Business Manager, but you would use specifically Apple Business Manager with a product called Jamf, and Jamf has an Azure and Intune snap-in, so it allows you to pull the Mac-specific MDM profile management into like Intune and vice versa. That's what I call the enterprise approach. If you do have corporate Apple and Apple iOS devices, that is non-standard. We need to discuss that. If it's a scenario where you have the Apple devices as a bring your own device, and there is a question that asks, so I'm going to tie two questions into one. Someone's asked the question of what is the difference between MDM and MAM? So MDM stands for mobile device management, MAM stands for mobile application management. If you are in a situation where executives have personal devices, i.e. their iPhones, you would use our solution and Intune as a MAM, mobile application management. So you don't actually manage the device itself, you manage the corporate applications on the device. So it's almost like you're containerizing, and I'm going to probably back out of using the word containerizing, but probably because you can also do that. What you're doing is managing the corporate applications on the device and the data, but you're not restricting. So if Bob or Sally have an iPhone and want to go and install Flappy Bird or whatever the latest, crazy game is on the iTunes App Store, they can do on their own personal device. The endpoint management would put them into a user group which is mobile application management only. So we wouldn't be locking down the actual device, the camera. All we would be saying is OneDrive, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook can't download or store data anywhere else, and we're controlling the company data. That is, I'm hoping that answers your question. How would I sell the idea to senior execs? And I've done this before, and I'm happy to take this offline. I would probably present the challenges of non-managed and unmanaged endpoints and the risks first, and start with it's known as like BYOD or consumerized device proposition first, before I wouldn't sell an exec team or a board the managed endpoint as a solution. I'd sell them the ability and the flexibility that is your current challenge, and you'll get the rest of the stuff off the back of it, if that kind of makes sense. I'm not sure if I've probably muddied the water in that one. So feel free to reach out to me separately and I can pick that up. Last couple of questions. Why should I treat non-company devices differently? That ties into that question. So the MDM and MAM, so bring your own device. You do not want to, and in some countries there are also laws protecting end user and personal information. You don't want to be treating an employee's personal iPhone or Android as a corporate one. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, so not in this role and this company, the company treated all the devices as company-owned devices. One of the employees was an executive assistant to two of the directors with her own personal device, and she'd had her phone stolen, and the company did a remote wipe on the stolen phone. The phone wasn't actually stolen, it was left in a taxi and it was returned to her. What actually happened is the remote wipe wiped a load of personal information that didn't exist anywhere else. In a situation where you're treating the device differently, you can do remote wipe or remote revocation of the corporate stuff and not the personal stuff. The same as if Sally leaves the business, you don't want to, and I've seen this over the last 3 years, I've seen it time and time again. Sally or Bob leave the business with a personal device and the company just clicks wipe and that personal device is wiped. And I've seen court cases come up where, not very happy. So that's why you would want to treat it differently. You want to control the company data on non-company devices, and then you want to treat company devices differently. So I've answered those two questions. And then somebody's asked, do we offer a trial? We don't offer a trial. It's quite, this is something that you need to put into, and it's quite, it integrates into your current environment, not disruptive. That sounds bad. Speak to us. The two ways of doing this, one is a proof of value. So we can sit down and work out and give you the proof of value of doing this in your business. That can help with budget, that can help with kind of getting budget allocation and approval. And we can do proof of concepts. They do come with a cost because obviously there's time involved in setting this up for a customer. But if you're an organization that wants to see what this looks like, come and speak to us. There are vendors that will give you a free trial. I would avoid against it at all costs because you can't really do a free trial on mobile endpoint management. And thanks very much for the comment. Someone's just said, not a question, but thanks for hosting it. And if anybody's got any other questions, thanks very much for joining. Ping them after this webinar, and hopefully you found it useful. Good. Thanks very much, Guy, for today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.